Good morning, Mill. Welcome back. I hope you had a great summer. I'm Walt, one of the pastors here, and I'm excited to be continuing our study of the opening segment of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, known as the Beatitudes. Today, we'll be going slightly out of order, skipping over to the sixth Beatitude, which we'll hit next week, and going straight to the seventh. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. But before we get into this blessing, I have a question for you. How many of you enjoy watching television sitcoms? Show of hands. I'm going to assume that there's a decent amount of hands up. And I know for sure that Pastor Chris is up because he loves his Tony Danza. But I want to let you in on a little secret, which might be a bit disappointing for those of you who are really into sitcoms each week. And here it is. They're all the same. Every single sitcom episode is the same. Yeah, I'm sure you could regale me with a nuanced understanding of Friends versus Modern Family versus Arrested Development. I know you have your favorites in Tina Fey and Jaleel White and Constance Wu. I get it. But the formula for every sitcom episode is the same. And here it is. 1, there's a problem. 2, the main character does whatever they can do to avoid or cover up the problem. 3, hilarity ensues. And 4, finally, they come clean or are found out and apologize or can't bear the shame any longer and confess. And everyone has a hug and a laugh. The end, roll credits. Am I right? I know I am. And look, I'm not dissing sitcoms. This is funny stuff. We love that awkward, squirmy feeling we get when someone digs themselves deeper into their lie. And we can empathize with them as they try anything and everything to avoid being caught or to avoid really dealing with the problem. It resonates with us. And the reason that it does is because so many of us are just terrible at dealing with conflict. Conflicts in our relationships cause us an immense amount of stress and anxiety, whether it's with our spouses or our parents or our neighbors or friends or siblings or colleagues. We hate it when there's a misunderstanding or a missed expectation. We feel bad when we accidentally wrong someone or when we put our foot in our mouths after making an awkward comment. And we really hate it when someone wrongs us, intentionally or not. We hate that the peace has been disrupted because now we have to deal with the fact that we've been hurt or that someone else has been hurt. We have to deal with the consequences of someone's actions. We go from being relaxed to being in damage control mode, from thinking things were just fine to realizing that there's something rotten here, from feeling close to someone to feeling far from them. The peace has been broken. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to make peace? I found that there are 2 ways that this tends to play out. The first is what we typically see in those sitcoms. Nothing happened. Everything is fine. We're okay. If we did wrong, we try to cover it up. And maybe no one will know. And if someone else did wrong, we let it slide. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have had where someone will go on and on about how wronged and how hurt and how frustrated they have been by the words or actions of someone close to them. They're losing their sleep, losing their appetite, losing their hair over how hurt they are. But when I ask them, so have you talked to them about this? They say, oh no, that would be weird. It's better if I just don't say anything at all. On one hand, I don't understand how something so disruptive and painful can go unaddressed. But on the other hand, I totally understand how something so painful can go unaddressed because I avoid conflict like it's the plague. Conflict is hard. It's hard to tell someone that they have hurt you. It's hard to invite them to examine their own heart and consider their motives or their words or actions. It's hard to ask for an apology, especially if I think they might say no. Maybe I just misinterpreted things. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe by letting this thing go, I'm being the bigger man. Maybe the best thing for our relationship is just to move on. Time heals all wounds, as they say. And let's be honest, isn't this the Christian thing to do? That's what God wants from us, right? To be nice and loving, not some kind of mean jerk that makes people feel bad about themselves. What could be more virtuous and Christ-like than that? So often, I attempt to make peace by ignoring wrong. Well, to be fair, I'm not really ignoring it. I think about it a lot. I'm just choosing to avoid talking about it because I don't want to rock the boat. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I suppose you could even call me a peace lover. That has a nice ring to it. And maybe you feel like this too. Or maybe you think I'm a total loser because you would never let anything like that go. When someone steps to you, when they do you wrong, when they disrupt the peace, you don't let it ride. You shut it down. To make peace is to neutralize a threat. I pity the fool that gets in your way. If a friend says something about you behind your back, you confront them and put them in their place. If your child misbehaves, you bring out the discipline in no uncertain terms. If someone says something ignorant on social media, you call them out for being the racist, sexist jerk that they are. Your solution to dealing with conflict is to ensure that it is as short-lived as possible, not through heartfelt conversation, but through action, through force, through power. Let's be real. We all kind of like that approach a little bit. We love the Western or the action movie about the retiring sheriff who just wants to keep the peace, because we know that when trouble rolls into town, oh man, it is on. And not in the let's sit down and talk about our differences kind of way, more like these outlaws are toast kind of way. Wyatt Earp was a sheriff like this, and do you know what the name of his gun was? The Peacemaker. Hashtag blessed, baby. Apparently, the Department of Defense heard about Wyatt Earp and said, we can do one better. They came up with the Peacekeeper, an intercontinental ballistic missile that can do all kinds of damage to ensure that the peace is preserved. Maybe some of your friends experience you like the Peacekeeper because they know that if trouble comes up, you are just going to blow the whole situation to smithereens. So when Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, is all of this what he had in mind? Blessed are those who avoid conflict at all cost. Blessed are those who maintain peace with an iron fist. Is that what peacemaking is all about? I don't think so. And I don't need to get into any deep Greek exegesis to know why not. Because having been in countless situations which involve those types of peacemaking, blessing is the last word that comes to my mind. I shared a moment ago about how my natural inclination is to keep the peace by keeping quiet and avoiding confrontation. I wish I could say that this has been an incredibly effective peacemaking strategy for me, but it has been anything but. In fact, when I think about the worst conflicts that I've been caught up in, the conflicts that keep me up at night, keep me from eating, that have put knots in my stomach and tears in my eyes, they weren't conflicts that just happened in a moment. It wasn't over one explosive and surprising occurrence. They were situations in which mistakes, division, and sin went unaddressed for months, even years on end. I kept hoping that the situation would just work itself out, that the person or people I had an issue with would have a change of heart, or maybe just leave altogether or relocate. But they didn't. Finally, things came to a head. It reached a point where the division was so strong and the sin so invasive that it couldn't be avoided any longer. And it was awful. I remember having conversations with friends and colleagues as we were weary and beaten down. And we asked ourselves, why didn't we say anything sooner? This issue could have been dealt with long ago and in a far less costly way. I thought I was making peace, but really, I was living a lie. On the other side of the coin, I know some folks who come down hard on any kind of mistake or who are unrelenting in their desire to call out sin in the lives of others. But I can't say I know them well because I learned a long time ago that I don't want to be around these kind of people. I grew tired of being on the edge and feeling ashamed when I was with them. It always seemed like they valued my behavior or conduct more than they actually valued me. And while it has been easy for me to get space from them, I know that for others, that kind of space is hard to come by. Many of my friends will share about how they grew up in homes that were incredibly devout, but incredibly strict. They were terrified to step out of line because they knew how hard their mother or father would discipline them. It was technically a peaceful home, but not a very loving one. What strikes me about both of these scenarios is that we aren't actually seeking to make peace. We're seeking to take control. And when we deliberately choose not to speak the truth in love, it's because we are trying to control how a situation will unfold. When we drop the hammer on those who do make a mistake, it's because we are trying to ensure that they never do it again. It's not peacemaking, it's peace faking. A measure of tranquility might be gained, but relationships are strained and even lost. This is what every dystopian novel warns against. Nothing good comes from exerting control in the name of peace, which is why we need Jesus to give us a third way. The other two do not lead to blessing. But if there's anything that we have learned from this sermon series, is that Jesus shows us a way to live that brings blessing in surprising and often countercultural ways. So what does Jesus mean by "blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God"? Well, here is actually where a little Greek can help us out. Let's begin with a fun fact. The phrase that Jesus used, which we translate as peacemaker, isn't found anywhere else in the Bible or in Greek literature of the time. It makes you wondering if Jesus, as he is preaching the Beatitudes, has this concept in mind, but he can't quite find the right word for it. My wife and I live in an apartment with really old windows, and recently one of them broke. It won't stay up when we try to open it. And I was on the phone with my landlord trying to describe the problem, and the best I could do was the rope, chain, pulley, window thing broke. This beatitude is kind of like that. But in Jesus' case, there probably wasn't a real word that described what he wanted to say. He had to coin a new term because what he's describing is just too different and too alien a concept for his listeners. What he's describing is a peace not like anything found on earth, and a call to be something never seen before. In Greek, the word for peacemakers is actually a combination of two separate words. Eirene, the Greek word for peace, and poio, which is translated to make. I know, this sounds very straightforward and not at all revolutionary, but bear with me. The Bible was written in Greek, but that wasn't the language Jesus would have been speaking in. He would have been speaking Aramaic, which is a form of Hebrew. And so the actual word that Jesus was saying here probably isn't the Greek word eirene, but the Hebrew word shalom. Shalom is one of those big words in the Bible that English just doesn't do justice to. It can be translated as peace, but that's really just scratching the surface. Shalom doesn't just mean the absence of conflict or a temporary ceasefire. It means wholeness or completeness. It stands for the way things are supposed to be, not just what we settle for. It is a state of harmony, of fullness. Think of it like peace in all caps. Peace in every possible sense of the word. Peace in how we relate to God. Peace in how we relate to one another. Peace in how we relate to our world. Peace here is more than the 5 minutes between shouting matches during Settlers of Catan. More than spouses setting aside their differences to focus on the kids. More than two countries agreeing not to bomb one another for the time being. Shalom is God's peace. The peace that embodies everything and inhabits everyone. Peace that leads to life. That's what we should have in mind when we hear the term peacemaker. The second Greek word, poeo, has a broader meaning than simply to make. It can also mean to do, or to be, or even to have, or to cause. It's like a catch-all action word. So peacemaker could just as well be peace doer, or peace haver, or peace causer, but the translators decided they don't really roll off the tongue in the same way. What I'm trying to get at is that being a peacemaker isn't someone who just makes peace like you would make an omelet or something. It's bigger than that. More like wholeness beer, or completeness causer, or fullness of life and relational harmony haver. But for our purposes today, we'll just stick with peacemaker. The way to blessing that Jesus is inviting his listeners to is by being peacemakers. So how do we do that? What? You don't know what it means to be a wholeness beer, right? It feels super abstract. But the good news is that Jesus gives us a super concrete picture of what a peacemaker is himself. Jesus was a peacemaker. He embodied the shalom of God. He was full of peace and brought peace into his relationship with others. He didn't avoid conflict, and he didn't overpower others with anger and rebuke. Instead, he brought peace into places of pain, into places of division, into situations that everyone else thought were beyond repair. He restored relationships between people and God. He made people whole. Our reading today was from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And in this section, he reflects on the division that existed between Jews and Gentiles. It was the prominent racial tension of the day. He reminds the Gentiles that at one time they were excluded from citizenship in Israel and without hope. There was a dividing wall of hostility that existed between them. These were not just ideological or cultural differences. This division between the two was fueled by generations of segregation, hate, and even violence. It was deep-seated and nasty. And it was into this division that Jesus entered, so that he might tear down the dividing wall and create a new, unified, peace-filled people. What made Jesus effective in his mission was that he understood what the problem was. He understood how destructive sin is, about how it erodes and degrades our relationship with one another and our relationship with God. Jesus has this reputation in some circles for not caring about sin all that much. Like he just said, oh, don't worry about it. Let's all hug it out. Jesus wouldn't talk about sin because that's judgmental or legalistic or mean-spirited. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Jesus cared about sin more than anyone, which is why we see him talking about it all the time. He was constantly calling the judgmental Pharisees to change their ways. He told a woman caught in adultery to leave her life of sin. And he warned that it was better to pluck out your eye or chop off your hand than allow either to cause you to sin. But the reason that Jesus cared so much about sin is that he cared so much about people. He cared so much about us. He wanted to bring about wholeness and fullness of life. And he knew that in order to fix something, he needed to address that which was broken. It couldn't happen any other way. Jesus spoke up about sin and selfishness and injustice to expose it, to keep it from being hidden, and to keep it from doing more damage than it had already done. By doing so, he helped people become reconciled to one another and reconciled to God. He created space for them to confess, to turn away from sin, to repent, and to allow for healing to happen in their deepest places of need. He wasn't the morality police. He was a peacemaker. And instead of seeking to control a situation by avoiding the problem or by asserting power, he gave up control. He chose selflessness. He chose sacrifice. Paul writes, his purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. The way that Jesus brought about wholeness was by being spread apart on the cross. The way that he brought life was by giving himself over to death. Jesus took our hostility and our divisions, our selfishness, our brokenness, and brought them to the cross so that they could be condemned and undone and stripped of their power over us. As a result, we who were once far off, far from each other and far from God, have been brought near. We are now able to be a part of a new humanity, a new people, a people who are defined by shalom. The blessing of being a peacemaker is that we are called children of God. 2 days ago, I got to visit my new nephew for the first time. And as with all new babies, there's been plenty of chatter about what he looks like. In this light, this side of the family really comes through, but with his hat on like this, he reminds me of so-and-so on this side of the family. Personally, I think this bicep kiss pic places him firmly on Team Quick. That and the baldness, of course. When we become peacemakers, like Jesus was a peacemaker, we take on the family resemblance of the people of God. We are able to be recognized for who we really are. Not people who shy away from sin and conflict, not people who overpower others with their demands for right living, but people who exhibit wholeness, fullness, and peace. People who aren't afraid to enter into conflict because we are driven by a desire for restored relationships. People who don't need to control others because we are willing to lay down our lives for them. Don't let others call you a peace faker because they realize that you're just offering a false promise of peace. Think about our divided, agenda-driven, and fractured world for a moment. Consider the immense pain caused by racism, greed, and fear. What if Christians were known for more than just being another faction competing for their slice of the pie? What if we were known for being peacemakers? We can be the ones to enter into strife and turmoil with something that no one else is offering, the Holy Spirit of God. Because Jesus fills his people with his peace, we can hold out the promise of hope that is far greater than a ceasefire or color blindness or overpowering our enemies. We can hold out the promise of shalom in the most devastated and broken places in our society. When the world says that these people should be mortal enemies, we can offer wholeness and reconciliation to them. We can invite hurting people to experience fullness and new life and restored relationships. And we can do this with integrity because this is happening right here in our church and in churches all around the world. I see it all the time. Strangers cross boundaries to love and serve those they've been told to hate because they are united by a love for Jesus that is greater than whatever divides them. We are living out what Paul proclaims when he says, "You are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ himself as the chief cornerstone." We are a part of the family of God, which means that both our relationship with God has been restored and our relationship with our neighbors, strangers, and even our enemies is now different. They no longer have to be defined by race or class or nationality or political party. Now, because of Jesus, our relationships can be defined by peace. I don't want to be known as someone who has an axe to grind or someone who doesn't have anything to say at all. I want to be known as a peacemaker. I want to be known as a child of God. Let that be true for all of us. Peacemaking is not easy. Next month, we'll spend another sermon on how to pursue reconciled relationships. But in the meantime, here are a few practical steps that you can implement in your day-to-day lives as you seek to be a peacemaker. First, be honest about sin, especially your own. We are all quick to call out the big ones: murder, adultery, exploitation. But it's the little ones that tend to do the most damage in our daily lives. The little white lies, the small insults, our feelings of pride and superiority, hidden lust and greed. They can begin small, but can develop into powerful, disruptive forces if left unchecked. Avoid the temptation to rationalize them. It's no big deal. Everyone does it. This person just have thicker skin, and so on. They stand in direct opposition to shalom. Name it, confess it, and conquer it. Second, keep short accounts. The writer of the letter to Hebrews cautions, "See that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." If someone in your life has made a comment or done something to hurt you, talk to them about it. Talk to them about it soon. Humbly share what happened and the impact it had on you. Invite them to share their perspective on it. Did they mean to hurt you? Was there some kind of misunderstanding or mistake? On a number of occasions, I have had friends and colleagues approach me to gently confront me on something I said or did which hurt them. And I am so glad they did, because it gave me an opportunity to apologize and ask their forgiveness and learn how I can be a better friend to them. If they hadn't said anything, I would have been totally oblivious. But instead of harboring bitterness, they chose to pursue shalom, to be peacemakers. And together we experienced blessing because of it. Third, and finally, have a vision for conflict. When you enter into conflict with someone, are you doing it just because you want to tee off on them, to really let them know how you feel? Or are you entering into a difficult conversation because you want to be in right relationship with them? There have been times where I have been scared to have a hard conversation with someone. I don't like to bring up painful issues. I'd rather talk about what shows on Netflix we're into. But I knew that if this problem wasn't addressed, our relationship was going to be in trouble. I didn't want that. And so I initiated the conversation not because I wanted to shame them or to fight with them, but because I wanted to love them. Because that's how Jesus loved me, by pointing out sin in my life so it could be done away with and we could be in right relationship with each other. As we enter into a time of worship and response, ask yourself, are there situations and relationships where you are missing out on the blessing of being a peacemaker? What is keeping you from seeking shalom there? If you're afraid to bring up a difficult topic, invite Jesus to give you the courage and vision that he had. If your own severity is wearing down those around you, ask Jesus to give you his gentleness and grace. Brothers and sisters, don't miss out on this blessing. It is God's gift to you and to the world. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.